I have changed my mind. I think for coaches, it's really important to be able to change your mind because after all, you don't want 1 year of coaching experience repeated 20 times. We want 20 years of coaching experience. We want growth. We want evolution. And I have changed my mind about something important. Let's first talk about how I think about progression. I think progression is really important for runners because after all, that's how we improve. We improve by progressive overload. We need to, over time, gradually do a little bit more and more with our training so that we can be giving ourselves the stimulus we need to keep improving. And almost always that means running more mileage, doing more intensity, being more consistent over time with our workouts, strides, strength training. No matter what it is, progressive overload almost always means more. But when I think about progression, I really am thinking about gradual progression over time. And I think this is because historically I was a very injury-prone athlete, and so I want runners to stay healthy. I'd rather you be healthy but 5% undertrained on the starting line compared with pushing the envelope so much that eventually you get injured and you can't even make it to the starting line. So I'd rather be a little bit more cautious with training and keep any increase in both volume or intensity fairly conservative, but be pretty consistent with it over time. That's what I used to think. I still pretty much think that, but now I make an exception. So here's the exception. Sometimes I think it's now okay for runners to do substantially more than what they're previously used to doing. And this is really only applicable to volume, not intensity. Because after all, intensity is usually what causes injuries. Running too fast, doing a workout way too hard, doing your easy runs too fast. The intensity or speed or pace of your running is a far bigger contributor to overuse injuries than just your volume, especially if you're doing that volume at a easy effort, a zone 2 effort. So if we're talking about big jumps up in workload, it's only okay if it's just volume. And so for a very long time, I thought, hey, let's just have runners gradually add a mile to their long run every 2 weeks or so. We'll take a cutback week. And if you're consistent with a long run, you're doing great. But now I think that it's sometimes okay for you to make a big jump up. For you to have a day where you might run substantially longer than what you're actually used to, even if it's maybe something that you've never done before. And here's why it's okay. If we keep the intensity down and do it at a much slower effort, the wear and tear on your body, the impact stress is so substantially reduced, but you still get a fairly strong aerobic stimulus that the injury risk is a lot lower, while the aerobic benefit is still pretty high. And this is actually a fairly common training strategy for ultra marathoners. You look at an ultra marathoner training plan and you'll look at a fairly consistent long run, but then every once in a while they'll jump up to 40 miles or they'll do a 50-mile tune-up race when their previous long run might have only been 30 miles. It's in these examples that we can learn from and apply it to our own training.
You know, I'm not that big into supplements, but I do love AG1 by Athletic Greens. I consider it my nutrition insurance, helping me cover all my bases so I know I'm not missing out on anything my body needs, especially when I'm training really hard. I try to eat really well, but of course, AG1 is that extra security that gives me peace of mind over my diet. 1 scoop per day, and I'm getting 75 vitamins and minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, antioxidants, and adaptogens. You can try it out too at athleticgreens.com/Jason, and they're going to throw in a free year's worth supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs. Check it out at athleticgreens.com/Jason.
I actually did exactly this last summer. I had only been running about maybe 12 to 13 miles as a long run, and a friend asked me to go on this circumnavigation of a mountain, and we were going to run some of it, hike some of it, And it was only about 14 miles, but it was gonna take us a substantial amount of time. And so I wasn't necessarily worried about the distance. I was worried about the time on my feet, because it was at altitude, we were covering some very gnarly technical terrain, and we were going up in elevation and covering a lot of elevation gain in the same run. And even though it took, I think, 4.5 hours roughly, we'll have to double check my math on this, but 4.5 hours compared to my normal 90-minute long run was so substantially longer, but I actually felt pretty good doing it, and my recovery time wasn't nearly as long as I thought it might be. And that's because at the end of it all, because it included a fair amount of hiking, we only averaged about 17-minute miles. It was mostly a combination of hiking and pretty slow running on the flat and downhill sections of this loop. And so the point here is, if you are going to do a much longer run than you're currently used to doing, it's probably okay if, number one, you're not doing it every other weekend. This has to be maybe once every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the duration of the increase, and also just depending on your ability and injury profile. And as long, too, that you are really cutting down the intensity of this effort. You can actually go much longer than what you're currently used to, but as long as the pace and the speed of that run is a lot slower, you're still gonna be getting in, a low zone 2, high zone 1 effort, which for hours and hours and hours and hours is really great aerobic development, but we're keeping that injury risk lower. And I think this has the potential to give runners a big boost in fitness without a similar boost in injury risk. So does this mean I think everyone should go out and double their longest run? No, of course not. But I am giving runners a little bit more leeway, a little bit more flexibility to take these kinds of risks in their training. And here in Colorado, where I live, this often manifests as big adventure runs on the weekends with friends, where you might not be ready to go out there for a 3-hour adventure because you've only been doing an hour and a half. But if the pace is a lot lower, you're gonna be able to do it just fine. And if we adjust our expectations going into a run like this, then we're probably gonna be just fine. Now, this isn't something you're gonna find in one of my training plans. I think this does have to be personalized to you very individually, the athlete, because if we get it wrong, if we go a little bit too long, if you go a little bit too hard, you are probably going to get hurt, because we're, after all, doing so much more than our body is previously adapted to doing. So be cautious. When in doubt, go a little bit shorter or run less time than you thought you really should for this kind of adventure run. But once in a while, going a lot further at a slower pace is just fine.